Small request, please switch on your video because without video, it will not show up to the delegates.
Yeah, and sorry, Mintu, before you start, again, we traditionally ask both the speakers to give a recap of their talk, right? So as mentioned, so maybe the first few minutes can be done. That can be done.
Just a clarification, Mintu. Dr. Alpesh, would you start or do we start?
Ma'am, it's on you only to start and carry forward the
Sure.
session.
Dr. Sahu, would you like to start or should I start the introduction? Okay, so your audio is a little low, sir.
Am I audible?
Mr. Mintu, is that okay?
Yes, we are live.
A very good evening and welcome to this module 6 of ESI research workshop led by the Endocrine Society of India in partnership with INTAS. I'm hoping that you've had time to go through the elaborate 3 modules that we've had, focusing on the tools which are available for scientific writing to be used with MS Word, and also an extremely important and relevant session on plagiarism and maintaining ethics while forwarding research with scientific writing. We have with us here Professor J.P. Sahu. He will be joining me as the moderator for this evening. He's Professor of Endocrinology, JIPMER, Pondicherry, India. I'm Dr. Chitra, Associate Professor, Endocrinology, Ramaya Medical College, Bangalore. We also have with us Dr. Nikhil Tandon, who's at the head of formatting this program and bringing this module for you. We also have Alpesh Goyal joining him for support. We also have the 2 people who delivered us great content for module 6. We have Professor Piyush, who's the professor of Department of GI Surgery, AIIMS, New Delhi. An exciting, thoroughly enjoyed the session on plagiarism, sir. We also are joined by Mr. Yogesh, who might be taking some time to get in touch with us and start the conversation. Mr. Yogesh is an educational media generalist at KL Wig Center for Medical Education, AIIMS, New Delhi. He's been involved extensively in workshops and numerous videos in furthering technology and incorporating it in scientific writing. Thank you so much for that session. May I now invite probably Professor Piyush Sani to quickly summarize the gist of his talk so that we'll open that up for discussion while we allow Mr. Yogesh Kumar time to settle in. Over to you, sir.
Piyush, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. As you grow old, sometimes you can't keep in touch with technology. So am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Good. Okay. So what I was supposed to cover was plagiarism. What I did was more than plagiarism, because I thought the issues around the ethics of publishing were more than just plagiarism. Of course, plagiarism is a major issue. So what I did was talk to you about some of the serious scientific misconducts that people could be indulging in, such as fabrication and falsification of data, or fabrication and falsification of material while they write up paper. Plagiarism, of course, was something that we did talk about. I also talked about duplicate and salami publications, basically redundant publications, when you publish for the sake of bolstering your CV and with no other intent. So you just want the numbers to be larger than a competitor's numbers, or they're just pure greed. There's no competition. You just want those numbers. So it's an addiction to keep publishing. And that's not a good thing. It's a good thing to publish, but to have an addiction and go ahead and publish, irrespective of whether you have information or you don't have information, is something that's of concern. I also touched upon conflict of interest, and this is something that comes up on a very routine basis in our day-to-day lives. We read about it in newspapers. We read about conflicts of interest amongst the judiciary. We did about conflicts of interest amongst journalists, and how people would try and manipulate stories just to get some TRPs, and that's a hot topic today in the lay media. But conflict of interest is extremely important in the health sciences. And that's why I touched upon it to make people aware of this issue. Talk to you a little bit about authorship and the issues involved around authorship. And I hope to have a lot of questions on this issue, because uh, in societies which generally have a hierarchical structure, we are not as hierarchical as the Japanese, but we are still quite a hierarchical as a society. And therefore, there are always these issues of whether somebody should be an author or not. And I touched upon the issues of authorship. And finally, I very briefly talked about pseudo journals, or what have also been previously known as predatory journals, a more recent phenomena, a phenomena that I was very concerned about when I was interviewing people for faculty positions at a prestigious institution. And a lot of the aspirants had in fact published in pseudo journals and predatory journals. A lot of them seem to be unaware of the fact that this was not something that they should be doing. And I therefore thought that this was something that I should talk about. So that was a gist of what I haven't gone into what I talked about, but I've just listed out the issues that I discussed, and I hope we can get some questions from the audience. Thank you.
Dr. Sahu, would you like to come in?
Shall we discuss, or will you ask Mr. Yogesh to present his recap?
Yeah, I think Mr. Yogesh has joined now. Maybe we can
Yes.
request both the speakers to do their. Mr. Yogesh, if you could please unmute yourself and just tell us about the key issues that you covered in both your presentations. I mean, obviously, you don't need the details, but just for the audience to be reminded about the key issues that you covered, and that allows them to come in with their questions. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Thanks for the opportunity, Dr. Nikhil. In my presentation, in first part, I just covered the bibliography management by using an open source software called Zotero, and explain almost good all necessary features in this particular presentation. And I am here to give you all the answers. And in second part, in MS Word, I just cover some of the topics which actually required for scientific writing, and in which heading 1, heading 2 kind of formatting, putting pictures behind the text or close to the text, cross-reference, one of the important one, which I covered extensively, and how to use even multi-level bullets, which I covered. And all these tools are actually time-saving tools. Otherwise, if you are doing everything manually, it takes a lot of time. Creating index, table of content, these are the tools which are actually required for scientific writing. And I just touch upon the just tip of those tools. But if you want to go in details, definitely we can discuss some of the details in our discussion today. So this is all about in bibliography management, how to get download your citations using Zotero, then how to use it in MS Word, and the applications available in MS Word for Zotero, how to edit your bibliography further. Then coming back, that how to include some of the text which is not available from the websites, that is also covered. And some of the features related with the security of bibliography, that is also covered, and how and where you can store all your bibliographic data, that I have already covered. But of course, now if the questions are there, I will be able to explain in details.
as we wait for the questions to roll in, could we ask you some questions
Sure.
to begin with? Okay.
Sure.
So, Mr. Yogesh, probably a first question to you. I was wondering, does Zotero work in, let us say, MacBooks, right? And I think you should tell us the answer, because I think
Yes, it
rough.
works.
Okay.
It works.
Okay.
Equally good.
And it also can be used with OpenOffice.
Yes, it is available. Initially, Zotero was prepared by Open Source Society only.
Okay.
And it is available for MS Word. This is available for OpenOffice, then LibreOffice, which is available from open source only, and then for Apple computers as well.
Okay.
So you can use it with any of the, initially it was available only with Mozilla browser, but now it is available of multiple browsers like Google Chrome, Mozilla, Firefox, and the other one, Safari for Mac. But my preferred choice is nowadays is you can use it with Google in any of the software system, whether it is on open source, Linux, or Ubuntu, or any other open source platform, or if you are using this MacBook, and install Google and then start working on this. But don't duplicate, means don't do it
Correct.
that, okay, I want to do it with Mozilla also, I want to do it with Internet Explorer also, I want to do it with Safari in the same system. So don't do that. Duplicacy should be avoided, but you can pick, choose your preferred one, whichever is your, wherever you are comfortable, and use it. And it is available for all.
All right. While we're on the topic of softwares, Professor Sani, could I ask you a question? You did show us all the available softwares that we could potentially use to pick up plagiarism, but I'd like to know which is your favorite, which is the most easy to work with for you?
So I think what is important is what is available to you. I think a lot of institutions have now subscriptions to some of the commercial softwares. At least my institution has, and provides access to all the faculty. The residents too can get access through the faculty or by going to the library. And for them, the availability of the software is, to my mind, that's what is key. So we have Authenticate available, and therefore we use Authenticate in a number of instances. But if you don't have Authenticate, I think any one of the free softwares works well.
Okay.
But you must remember that the difference between a free software and a commercial software is the amount of background information that these can access. So if I run a commercial software, I ensure that I get access to behind firewalls. So if there is a firewall where a subscriber needs to pay to get access to published literature, so a journal website, for example, which has a subscriber database, and if you are a subscriber only, then you can access the data. So all that you will get is an abstract. You may not get the full text. So commercial softwares will ensure that they get access to these, while free softwares generally may not be able to access these. So it doesn't matter if you use a free software, you will get access to all open access material, but you may not get access to information that is behind a firewall, behind a paid firewall. That's one. Second, most commercial databases, commercial softwares which look at plagiarism would have access to textbooks. So ebooks would be accessible to them because most ebooks are not available free. And therefore they would go behind paid firewalls to get access to books. So again, the likelihood that you would find duplication of information would increase as the amount of database available to you increases. So from that point of view, using a commercial software is a better choice than using a free software. But if you don't have a commercial software, then a free software is fine. you try and use whatever you have, whether you use Deja Vu, whether you use ET Blast, whether you use Viper. So some of these, or you use Google Scholar or Google, for example, some of these have a limit on how many words you can process in a day. Others have limits on, so the free softwares, not the commercial software, the free softwares. So for example, if I was to use a free software, some of them would say one file of 10,000 words is what they would allow me to use in a week. Some would say in a day. I could, in the commercial softwares, buy a small package, but most of them are beyond the reach of individuals and would usually work with institutions. So Authenticate is something, if an individual were to access, it will be very expensive. So it's best to go to a library which has access to it and use that. So my personal, I have access to Authenticate, so I use Authenticate. It's probably got the largest database at its backend to be able to search through. But I think more important than using the database is to look at the results, not to look at a number, something that I emphasized during the talk as well. But don't look at a number. Don't look at a 10% or a 15% or a 20%, but look at what is required by way of what you are supposed to be looking for. So I could have a 35% overlap. And as an editor of a journal, I might accept that, because the author of that review article, of a systematic review or a meta-analysis, has in fact taken material, text, tables from original sources, taken permission and reproduced them. And he has under the table written, reproduced with permission from. The software recognizes this as duplicate, because a lot of articles would say reproduced with permission from. So it's the human mind behind the person who's looking at the screen that's more important. The percentage is not the only thing that's important. What is important is to look at what is available and what you're looking at, whether that is useful or not. So a cutoff, a 5% overlap in an original article may not be acceptable, because that 5% is 2 paragraphs in the discussion section of the paper, which are lifted off completely from one article. The rest of the article may be completely written by themselves. So that's something in an original article that I would not accept. So I think the percentages are not important. The software is not important. I think it's the understanding of what you're looking at, which is important.
Thank you, sir, for your comments on plagiarism.
Go ahead.
So, yes, sir. So please go ahead.
Piyush, I have a slightly different sort of level of question. We've jumped to the software and the use of technology, but sort of 2 queries. One is, assuming that nobody wanted really to plagiarize, what are the usual reasons why people actually end up picking up stuff, and what is it that students should realize? I mean, that this is where you're likely to stumble and fall. And as you mentioned, one of the things I realized a long time ago was that if you're not proficient in language, you know what you have to say, you've said that, and then you come across somebody else who possibly had a better sort of knowledge of language, and you say, hang on a sec, this is exactly what I wanted to say, but this he seems to be saying the same thing so much better than what I wrote down in the first place. And I'm not justifying or excusing somebody, but so where are the likely slippery slopes for people so that they are careful about this in the first place? Instead of having reached a position that you apply the software and find that, hang on a sec, we've made a real meal out of it. And the second thing, of course, would be the usual problems of people justifying that, but this was what we'd written in another article. It was ours to use. Again, not realizing issues about copyright and who owns that language now. But maybe the first one is critical for me as to which are the common places where people stumble, and not because they had an evil intent, but I think they couldn't cope with the task at hand sometimes.
So interesting points that you raised. The reason why people stumble is variable. So for the residents, most often it's time constraint. They're rushing against time to complete a task, write up a protocol, do a review of literature, plus do their clinical duties in a new place. And they're just getting overwhelmed. So in the process of being overwhelmed, they're told that there was a similar piece of work that was done in the department. They go looking for that dissertation, maybe even contact the person who wrote the dissertation and say, could you pass on your dissertation to me? And then it's so easy. All that you need to do is copy, paste, that's it, done. And the review of literature is done. So when I do these sessions where I teach people that you've got to do, when you write up a protocol, what is the purpose of doing a review of literature? The purpose of doing a review of literature is to actually come abreast with the knowledge of your mentor or your guide, so that you can have a useful discussion with the mentor or the guide. Otherwise, the mentor or guide would be talking at a level which is very different from you. And how would then you be able to understand what is being asked of you? So the purpose is to try and acquire enough information, enough knowledge, and that's why we want you to write up the review of literature. If you copy and paste somebody else's review, the information is not just going to get into your head. There's no automatic transfer. Very few people have the gift where they can look at a page and then photographic memory, remember the whole page for the rest of their lives. There are very, very few of those. So that's one. The second is when you start writing up, and you very rightly mentioned people who have language issues, but it's not just people who have language issues. A lot of people who have language issues actually copy the wrong things. They think what somebody else is saying is what they want to say, but it's actually the exact opposite. So you often get papers where you see the data and you say the conclusion drawn should be different. The results should be written in a different manner. The discussion should be working along different lines, but this is happening along a different line altogether. And when you send in a query, you don't really get a straight answer because the person herself is not very sure of what is happening. So if language is a challenge, my request to everybody is, language is a challenge for me. I haven't overnight become an expert in the language. Even today, I stumble. Use simple words, use words that you understand. Make notes while you think about what you wish to write. Make notes when you read a paper. And then write down the stuff in your own language. When you start writing, it's often very difficult to start off. You don't know where to start. Write whatever you wish to write. Write rubbish. But don't send the first draft for publication or for your guide to look at. Read what you've written. And read it 3 weeks, 4 weeks after you've written it. You read it write today, read tomorrow, useless. You're so familiar, it looks very nice. You've got to leave it aside. Put it in your drawer. None other than the then editor of the British Medical Journal, Dr. Stephen Locke, who in the 1980s came and did a workshop at the Indian Institute of Medical Sciences, said, I write up a paper and I put it away in my drawer for 3 weeks. When I take out the paper and read it again, I wonder which fool wrote it. That was Dr. Stephen Locke. So it happens with all of us. When I've written something, I've read it after a few days. It seems, why did I write these sentences? Because now I've got a clearer picture of what I want. The other very good way of trying to decide what to write and how to write is to actually have a conversation with a friend. Sit down across the table with somebody and talk to that person, and explain to that person what you've done, how you've done it, and what you've achieved. So your introduction, your methods, and your results are done. Have that conversation. Let your friend query you on whatever you've said. And today it's so easy. Record the conversation on the phone, play it back to yourself, and you are very much clearer as to what you wish to write. Now, when it gets down to actual writing, if you've taken notes rather than kept another paper in front of you, a paper, published paper, or a textbook chapter, if you write without anything being in front of you, just your notes, just the points that you've jotted down, it's very unlikely that you will reproduce something that you've read 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. Unfortunately, to do all this, you can't be bound down with a deadline. So you must have enough time. Unfortunately, people start writing up papers, protocols day before the interview, day before the submission of the application, the day before or the day after they were supposed to submit their thesis, or the day after they were supposed to submit a protocol. All wrong times to start. Now, good to preach, difficult to practice. I used to do the same thing, to write everything the night before, and obviously made a hash of it. But I've learned my lessons, and I've learned that that's a wrong way of doing things. Writing even to those who have the gift. So there's some people who have the gift. Dr. Nikhil Tandon and I know somebody who has the gift. Dr. Srinath Reddy, who's the president of the Public Health Foundation of India. He has the gift. He has the ability to be able to write a brilliant first draft. But none of us can. Most of us will need 3, 4, 5 iterations before we get to what we have. And that requires time. If I'm going to write today and try and do a redraft tomorrow, I'm unlikely to improve as much as if I were to do it 5 days later. So put time and space between what you've written and your revision, and you'll do well. So all difficult things to do, but easy to preach. So I'm preaching because I have today your attention, and therefore I can go ahead and preach. I hope I've answered Nikhil's questions, and I hope it serves the purpose that he wanted me to, wanted it to serve. To the,
thank you, because people tend to get distracted by technology, and you will not come in for rude shocks if you sort of apply the first principle. But I believe there are a lot of questions in the chat box on technology, so I think we should do those.
Sir, before going to questions in chat box, I have a question for Professor Piyush. Sir, what is the basic difference between fabrication and falsification of data? And do you think it is important for our student thesis?
Yeah, so I think it's very important that you do not create data in any manner. If you do, then that's obviously an issue. Now, fabrication is creating something out of nothing. So you don't have anything and you start fabricating information. So for example, I could fabricate a whole study. It's been known to be done. You look at somebody else's paper, you look at another paper, you look at a third paper, you don't do anything, and you just write up something without any information, without any data. So that's bad fabrication. But there is a slightly better fabrication, and that is that I have data. I have data for 10 variables. Now, once I start writing up the paper, I realize that I should have taken information. I should have got information on another 2. I missed doing it. When I wrote up my protocol, I forgot to put this in. And when I was collecting data, I did think of it once or twice. I have data for 1 or 2 patients, but I don't have it for the whole group that I've studied. So now what do? If I have this information, my paper gets strength. So I now fabricate this information. So I don't have anything and I fabricate. Falsification is slightly different. I have information. I look at the information and I don't get what I want. So I don't get a confidence interval. I don't get a p-value. I don't get a correlation coefficient that I want. I know I can remove the outliers and then get what I want. So I do that. My data this is not cleaning up data. This is falsification of data. So fabrication is creating something out of nowhere, and falsification is changing things that you have to suit your end, as far as in the context of scientific research is concerned. Now, you could falsify data, you could falsify images, you could fabricate data, you could fabricate images. You could, so fabrication, falsification doesn't limit itself to just data. It could be done with images as well. In fact, the famous case that I mentioned of William Summerlin, the immunologist, what he did was falsify an image. He had an image, but his experiment hadn't worked. So he falsified the image. He created something which suited him. He had an image which hadn't worked. He colored it black and got it done.
Thank you, sir. Sir, recently, like few months back, the study on remdesivir, this was in relation to COVID-19 infection, and it was published in the two landmark journals, NEJM and Lancet, at the same time. So, and this, I think, sir, whatever you have mentioned. So, if you go through these two papers, it looks like both they have done fabrication and falsification of data. So, if this is happening in the best of the best journal, so how common this is there in the other journals, and is there any way to check how to know if somebody is submitting one original article, whether the data are real data or it has been manipulated? As a editor, as a reviewer, sir, can you guess? Is there any way to get an idea about this?
So see, largely as editors of journals, we would rely on reviewers, especially when we run general medical journals. I run a general medical journal. I am a surgeon by occupation, by profession, whatever. So my core knowledge is not in, say, for example, endocrinology. So if I need inputs on a paper which is on endocrinology and I need somebody to opine on that, I would rely on you, on Nikhil, on experts in the field. And I would ask them for their inputs. Now, what one would expect from them is that if they have, if they're uncomfortable with the data, they should point it out to us. Of course, statisticians, if they look at raw data, they could pick up some of these errors. They could pick up information which was not provided and ask for information that was provided, and then look at that information and see whether it gels with what is provided in the paper itself. Sometimes people provide supplementary data. There was a paper which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences and then got retracted. And it was supplementary data that was creating the problems. Somebody was looking at supplementary data and not finding the information that was supposed to have been there. So if you look at a paper carefully, you can sometimes pick up errors. But remember, an editor and 2 peer reviewers or 3 peer reviewers and an editorial board of say 5, 7, 8, 10 people is very different from thousands of people looking at that paper. Those thousands look at it after publication, once it's out in the public domain. So you will continue to get papers which go past our eyes, because however good we may be, however conscientious we may be, however good our reviewers may be, however good our statisticians may be, we're all humans. And therefore errors will happen and papers will get published in good journals, in not so good journals, which have information which is not really up to the mark. I'm not saying fabricated, falsified. I'm just saying things don't gel. You're uncomfortable with the information that is being given to you. It's too clean. Something that's too clean, squeaky clean is something that we are all very wary of. So something that answers each and everything that you could ever wish to get answered for of a particular disease, of a particular condition, is something that would make me wary of things. So the pandemic was a different scenario altogether. When the pandemic came up, there was fear, there was a desire to go ahead and get the right information, get patients to be helped. It was a public health emergency. So there was a certain amount of laxity, I think, in journals, where people used slightly lower benchmarks to let papers get published. They weren't very much lower, they were slightly lower. Now, fast track publication happens in journals. There are journals which have mechanisms in place to do fast tracking. But fast tracking means you would tell me before you were ready with your paper that here is something, here's an abstract of a paper that I'm writing up. And would you be willing to fast track it? I would be able to submit it to you in a week's time, or 2 weeks' time. I at the journal would then be able to put in place a mechanism. Ask reviewers, will you be able to fast track your reviews? Would you have the time? So approach 5 people, maybe 1 agrees, maybe 2 agree. That yes, they would have the time to do the review, but still expect the same quality of the review. It's not, I'm not compromising on the quality of the review. Here, it was a public health emergency, so there were some compromises made. And some of the information that went out into the public domain, there were others who picked it up and said, hey, look, what is this? These guys are not the right guys. But that was not known to the journal editors, that was not known to the reviewers, and they were focused on looking at the data. So there were other things which they didn't look at. If they'd looked at, they might have said, oh, hey, wait, there's a problem there. So sometimes there are other people who look at it and then you get this information that something wrong has gone out. Nothing wrong. You withdraw the paper, you retract the paper, but you always give the author an option, a chance to explain why this happened. In this instance, obviously the explanations either weren't forthcoming or were not appropriate, and therefore the journals very quickly retracted those papers. But so I don't think the journals are at fault. So you can, the news channels can say, these guys are the crooks. The journal editors are the crooks. They took money from the pharmaceutical company to promote remdesivir. No. The editors of the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet are people of impeccable integrity, I can tell you that. I know them personally for a very long time. And I can tell you that you can't question their integrity. People can make mistakes, and they made a mistake. They were honest enough about it, and they pulled back the papers. So I think what is important is to understand that this can happen. It should happen rarely. It happens rarely, but it does happen. It's more likely to happen with a high quality journal because the stakes are higher. A lower quality journal, a person may not wish to push something which is fabricated and falsified. So if I've created something, I would want to go to the best journal and publish there. Why should I go to a second-rate journal or a third-rate journal and publish it? Or at least somebody with a lower impact or a lower audience and a lower reach. Okay. So that's how I would put the whole thing in perspective as far as the remdesivir papers and retractions are concerned.
Thank you, sir. Now we'll go to few questions. Those have come to chat box. The first question for Mr. Yogesh Kumar. The question is, sir, how can I sync my Android for research paper browsing data to Zotero, which is there in desktop? Sir, please unmute yourself.
Normally, Zotero provides a sync facility to sync your all the devices which are connected with the help of their cloud facility. So if you have open your account in Zotero, as I explained earlier, so if you have your account is there, you can use your mobile phone as your browser, not having any application so far, but maybe in some of the people attempted actually for creating an app for this, but so far it is not successful. So as a browser, if you are using as your browser, you can sync anywhere with any computer as per your account details for your email address, password, and then you start working, everything will get synced with any other computer. So nothing, no problem at all. I find there is another question by Dr. Mintu. He want to install and Zotero, and he is not getting a connector in the Google. So this is available if you just install connector for this. There are two things available in Zotero nowadays. There's a standalone application which will get installed in your system, which will connect automatically to your Word file. But for browser, you need to install a small connector as well. For Google, there is a connector. For Mozilla, there is a connector, and for Safari as well. Whichever browser is your open, you will find the icon of that browser as well as on the side the connector. So if you just install that, this problem will get solved, and you will see the icon in the browser list to save for Zotero. If you want,
Thank you,
I
sir.
can show you the demo also for this. If I share my screen, and I will be able to show you.
So, JP, maybe we can ask Dr. Piyush Sani the next question. In the meantime, we can sort of give Mr. Yogesh the control over this on screen sharing, so that he can actually demonstrate it to the people, so that it's not just a theoretical answer but a practical. So maybe Mintu, if that is possible, can you give? Does Mr. Yogesh need to
I
have?
can start sharing right now.
You can? Okay, then why don't you go ahead and do that first?
Now there are two things you can see here on the screen. One is Zotero. This is you need to install first. And second one is install Zotero connectors. This is now showing for Chrome because it is now open with the Google browser. If you are using with Mozilla, you will find this icon as the Mozilla icon file connector. You just need to install, just click, it will go and ask some permission. And because I have already installed in this system, it is asking me to remove, but otherwise it will just install in just next 2 clicks and your problem will be solved. And you will find somewhere here something like this. I'll just show you PubMed also. Here, the moment you are here, so you will get these icons here somewhere, and in this, now it is save to Zotero, one option. Another option will appear here. It's a maybe a page, or maybe a, say if I just open it, it will show you the icon here, and you can just connect it, use it in your Zotero. Any other question I have?
There seems to be another question while we're at it, Mr. Yogesh, about installing Zotero and taking it forward. So the question is, I installed Zotero and connector, but the icons are not appearing in Google.
That I
and
have just explained. By using Google connector,
yeah,
you will be able to get this icon there. But otherwise also you will get on the save, any of the article you will click, right click, then you will get the save to Zotero option also available.
yeah. And in MS Word, you did show us that you can go on to the add-ons icon and add Zotero onto MS Word. You
Not
did
in
show
MS
us.
Word. If it is an MS Word, I'll just show you MS Word also.
Yes, there seems to be one question about opening it through MS Word as well. Could you please
I'll just show
demonstrate
you.
that? Thank you.
I need to share the screen again. This is MS Word. This is actually, and this is the icon for Zotero. The moment you will install the standalone version of Zotero, it will automatically get installed and will be visible here. And here, these are the icons which you can use to manage your bibliography by adding citations, then editing citations, document preference if you want to change from one style to another later on. Then this is to refresh if you have edited something. And this is finally in the end, when you have completed everything and you have prepared one copy separately to unlink your citations to, if you want to send it for publication or for review, etc. Uh, as far as Zotero is concerned, suppose this icon is not available here in your Word, then you just go to the Zotero which is available on your desktop, this kind of icon which you are seeing here. Go to edit, go to preferences. In preferences, you have the options available. This is site, and here we have some styles, and next to styles is word processor. So here you will get this answer here is not currently installed or say installed. So installed Microsoft Word add-in. Just click it, it will say okay, and it will complete the process. You need to maybe start or the system again, and your problem will be solved.
Thank you, Mr. Yogesh.
I have a question for Mr. Yogesh.
Yes.
Sir, how can we delete the duplicate references through Zotero?
Okay. In Zotero, in this particular list, let me share my screen once again. You will find here in first my library icon only, you have a duplicate item option available, right? The moment you will click this duplicate icon, you will find that all the duplicate icons citations will get collected here in order. You just need to merge them. There is an icon will appear here and you need to just say merge and it will merge. Maybe I will be able to show you this merge facility because I'm using this particular computer first time. Because of some technical issue, I need to switch over to the different system. So let me connect to my Wi-Fi through this and I will be able to show you the duplicate version very soon. Let me have
Thank you,
some.
sir. Now I have an important question for Professor Pius. So nowadays, having multiple publication from a single study, nowadays it is become very common in our country. Uh, Maybe one of the reason, maybe there is a pressure on guide to have multiple publications for their CV or promotion. So whatever the reason, uh, for example, sir, I will give you an example. Like suppose one student has collected data like anthropometry data, like biochemistry, like lipids, glucose, RFT, LFT, lots of data was collected in a like in a community survey study. So I have come across few papers I have seen from same survey with limited number of patients like 500 patients or 1000, 500 subjects or 1000 subjects. There are 4 papers, 5 papers, 6 papers. So is it justified? How to differentiate from salami publication, from duplicate publication, or like whether we describe all of these publications are redundant publications. So what is your take on that message? Because nowadays it is becoming an important problem in almost all institutes in our country.
So I think you raise a very relevant point. What is duplicate publication? So we understand what is duplicate publication, but how do I recognize something that this is duplicate? So if you were to catch an author who has, so you're talking about 500,000 people surveys and then multiple publications, may even be acceptable to me. My problem is you have one case report, one case, and you create 5 publications out of it. The pathologist writes a separate paper. The radiologist writes a separate paper. The nuclear medicine person writes a separate paper. The surgeon writes a separate paper, and the physician writes a separate paper. 5 from one case. No way, I cannot accept. So I'll tell you a story. We did a study and we decided that we should publish this. So we created one paper. When we created one paper and we asked somebody to have a look at it and say, what does he or she think about it? The person looked at it and said, why don't you create 4 papers out of this? One on the radiological aspects, one on the follow-up, the long-term follow-up that you have, one on the clinical presentation, and one on the pathological findings that you got. The numbers weren't small. We had about 250 odd patients of that disease at that particular point in time. And we said, well, this sounds interesting. We were in the early parts of our career. So me and a colleague of mine, we said, this is interesting. Yeah? Why shouldn't we do this? This is interesting. Let's do it. And we, in fact, thought about it. And then we went to our big boss and we said, our guide, our mentor, our professor had said, sir, we were assistant professors at that time. Sir, how about splitting this paper up into 4? So he looked at us and he said, why do you wish to do that? We said, well, it would focus, one would focus on the radiological aspects, one on the pathological aspects, one on the clinical presentation, and so on and so forth. He said, sit down. If you were to read that paper on radiology, would you want to know about the clinical presentations? Yes, sir. If you were to read the paper on pathology, would you want to know the radiological presentations and the clinical presentations? Yes, sir. So tell me, what would be more informative, a single paper or 4 papers? Yeah, a single paper would be more informative, but it did get 4 publications. So he says, this is how you create salami science. This is how you do duplicate publication. So when you start splitting up small amounts of information to create more papers, that's duplicate or salami. But there could be a justifiable reason to do it. So I could have a large database. For example, in your field, so the Framingham cohort is an example, but in India, there are these multiple studies that came out, which, if I remember correctly, were called the Chennai Urban Something Studies from Dr. Mohan's group. Patients with diabetes and various aspects to look at. And it was an urban cohort that they were looking at, and they were creating multiple papers from these studies. They, in fact, numbered the papers with an acronym. I forget the acronym now, but they numbered them with an acronym so that you could be sure that this information was coming from the same cohort. It was different information. So this was justifiable. Correct. So the purpose behind that was that each of those papers was providing a message which was in answer to a question. So they posed a question, they looked at the data that they had to answer that particular question, and they came out with a message related to that particular question. Now they looked at a second question, and then they looked at the information related to that question, and they came out with a second paper. Now, if they merged the 2 papers, would they have got more information there for people to read? Yes, but would it have been easy to understand? Probably no. Probably it would have become very confusing. So I've looked at some of those papers and I thought some of those papers could have been clubbed together, but very few if at all. And therefore, if you can justify, you can give me a reason, you have different messages to convey. For example, if you were to do a study on people with diabetes who had kidney dysfunction, and you wanted this paper on kidney dysfunction to go out to this message to go out to nephrologists, not only endocrinologists, but also nephrologists, then it would be very justifiable to create a second paper from that data for a nephrology audience, which would not be interested in a lot of the other information that you've got. They may not be interested in the retinopathy aspects. They may not be interested in the neuropathy aspects. They may not be interested in a number of other things. And therefore, you may need a more focused paper for them. But if I were to do that, then I must justify my reasons or provide people the reasons to do that. And it's important to do that publicly in the sense that I write to the editors and said, look, I've created 2 papers out of this database. And this is my reason to do it. If I can do that, that's fine. Now it's up to the editors to take a call on whether or not they should publish your 2 papers, or an editor could say, look, I think it's much better to do a single paper and take this paper to a nephrology journal rather than to an endocrinology journal. Or another editor might suggest go to a general medical journal, which would be read by nephrologists as well as by endocrinologists. So I think it's very important to look at what you've got. We spend a lot of time writing up our papers, but we spend very little time thinking about what is our message, where do we want to publish this, what is our title, what are we putting into the abstract. Usually the abstract is the last bit of the paper, and what we do is pick out sentences from our paper and put them into the abstract. That's not what we should be doing. See, something that's taken us 2,500 words to explain, a sentence from there into a 250-word abstract cannot justify or cannot be the right thing to do. You must pick up and create a new sentence which has more information to be able to provide the gist of that paper within the abstract. So if you want to do a good job, it requires a lot of hard work, and this unfortunately needs to be done. But there could be reasons. I could have a large database. I could be looking at 200 patients, but 700 variables, and over a period of 7 years or 10 years, and I might be able to create multiple papers out of that. So duplicate publication is when it happens. You know, I know, if we are the creators of this duplicate publication, that we are creating a duplicate publication. We then try and justify when we get caught out and we say, no, we did this, we did this, we did this. So if we know that this is duplicate publication, we should do it. If we are unsure, it's best to go to a senior person and ask that person, should I be doing this? Like we went. We didn't go to learn what is duplicate publication. We thought it was a great idea to create 4 papers. And that's why we went to the boss. But if you have the right mentor, you have the right guide, they would tell you that this is the wrong thing to do. Okay, I hope that answers the question. Sometimes it can be a very thin line. So I would err on the side of creating a single paper if I had a doubt, rather than create 2 papers. I would create 2 papers only if I was absolutely sure that I had 2 clear different questions for which I had 2 clear different messages. I would then create 2 papers. Hope that helps.
Sir, I have another question.
Sure.
Sir, I've seen a few of my colleagues, researchers, they want to submit the research paper simultaneously to multiple journals. So what do you think? What they think? If you will submit to one journal, so it will take time. We don't know whether it will be accepted or not. So that we will submit to multiple journals, and you will see whichever journal accept, and from other journals will retract the paper. So, what is your opinion on this aspect?
It's an unethical practice. It's considered an unethical practice. Duplicate submission is not acceptable. You should not do duplicate submission. Why? Now, one reason for not doing a duplicate submission is that you submit to both journals. And today there are journals who will accept your paper and publish it 48 hours later. They will publish it in the manner that they have received it. And they will put down a watermark and say that this is accepted for publication, not edited yet. So it's a preprint kind of, not a preprint, it's an online version of the journal that's become available. Of the paper that's become available. And the final version of the paper would come up, say, 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, after due processes have happened. Now, this is to give primacy to people who have first published a paper. So other journals would say accepted on a certain date and put down that accepted date and help you get primacy over somebody else who publishes a similar thing by that date when your paper was submitted and accepted for publication. But I think what is important to realize is that if you submit to 2 journals, and if they were to put this up simultaneously, then you're in a soup because you now have a duplicate publication, number 1. Number 2, good peer reviewers are scarce. To get Dr. Nikhil Tandon to review a paper, I have to remind him 10 times. He's smiling. Okay, but he's in demand. No, he's in demand. He's a good reviewer. So 20 journals are asking him to do the same thing. He's a single person. Now, if I were to ask him to review a paper which is being sent to another journal, where another reviewer is also reviewing that same paper, in the hope that you as the author get a publication quickly, that's not fair. What we are doing is we are using scarce resources. Good peer reviewers are very scarce. It's a very scarce resource. And when I'm asked to review a paper, if I don't have the time, I just say, I'm sorry, I can't review. So good peer reviewers are scarce, and therefore you're using up a scarce resource. If I had small amounts of electricity and water available, I would want to use it judiciously because it's a scarce resource. So similarly, peer reviewers are a scarce resource, and therefore we should not waste that resource. So that's unfair and that's not right. And it's considered an unethical practice. I have in fact caught out people who have wanted to withdraw the paper after they've submitted to us. And I said, give me a reason that you wish to withdraw. I'll let you withdraw the paper. It's your right to withdraw the paper, but give me a reason. And then they don't give me a reason, or they give me a reason which is obviously a very stupid reason. I then track that paper because 2 or 3 weeks later, that paper will appear. All that I need to do is to remember, put it up on my desktop, and after 3 or 4 weeks, just go and search it on Google. 9 out of 10 times, I'll find the paper there. And I know that it's been submitted elsewhere. I then often send an email. Sometimes in a good mood, I don't. But often when I'm in a bad mood, I send an email to the author and say, you told me a lie. And next time I catch you doing this, I will write to your institution and tell them that you're indulging in unethical practices. It's time consuming for us to do these kind of things. And so this is a good medium to tell youngsters, please don't do this. If you want papers to be reviewed fast and in time, you must not use scarce resources. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Before going to Dr. Chitra, she may have a few questions to ask the experts. So I have last question for you. Suppose both faculties, like husband and wife, they are working in the same institute, and husband has published one paper, and wife's name is there. Is it always conflict of interest? So there are some issues in some institutes regarding this publication and authorship. So, sir, is there any rules or regulation to tell whether it is conflict of interest or not?
So, my wife is an anesthetist, I am a surgeon. So it's likely that we might end up publishing something together.
Yes, sir.
Fortunately, we work in different institutions, so we will not end up publishing together. But if she and I were working in the same institution and in a related field, that's fine. The problem comes up when one of the people is in a field which has nothing to do with what the paper is all about. That's unacceptable. So if husband and wife were to work in the same field, did the research together, then that's acceptable. But if they haven't contributed and the name is being put in just for the sake of giving the husband or the wife a publication. So it happens both ways. It doesn't stop at husband and wife. I have seen instances of published papers where the whole family is involved. So the son and the daughter-in-law, the daughter and the son-in-law. 6 people with the same surname are involved with the paper, all from diverse fields. Dental surgery, medicine, radio diagnosis, pathology. There is no radio diagnosis, there is no pathology in the paper. So what is the role of the radio diagnosis and the pathology person? So what is important is you don't gift authorships, whether to your own family members or to anybody else. So gifting authorship is something that shouldn't happen. If somebody is involved in the work, belongs to your family, so and a son and a father could actually work together in the same field and they could create something useful. There are a number of examples of people who have worked in from the same family, worked in the same field, created great amount of good work in India, abroad, everywhere. So totally justifiable to have those people together on a single paper. But gifting authorship just because you want to get a publication for a family member is not acceptable. So I would say gifting authorship is what is crucial. You shouldn't be gifting authorship. The person is not involved in the work, should not be doing it. But so family, if they've actually done the paper together, should be okay.
Thank you, sir.
So can I come in to ask? Yes. So while we're at the topic of authorship itself, we spoke about family. Could we just move to department and hierarchy and dynamics in the department? So you did address that in your session, sir, that usually gifting is done to, let us say, professors or head of the department because they are the head of the department, or another person in the department who might have offered a keen insight which probably changed the direction of the main message of the paper itself. So what degree of involvement is okay? How do you discern the line? Would you throw some light on that?
So it's very difficult, to generalize and say this is acceptable and this is not acceptable. So in the hierarchical system, you not only put the head of department's name to oblige the head of department, but you often use the head of department's name because you feel that the head of department knows journal editors. Correct. And therefore is likely to be able to influence the publication, the name of, so if one of Nikhil's residents were to write a paper and were to put Nikhil's name at the end, if I were to see the paper, I would say, oh, it's come from Nikhil. If I was to see the resident's name and Nikhil's name not there, I would say, oh, acha. So don't know who's published it or who's sending it. So there is a credibility associated with the senior person, and therefore people would provide gift authorship. What is important is for us as senior people to refuse those gift authorships if you're not involved with the paper, number one. Number two, what is important is that the senior people actually set an example and say, look, if I have not been involved, I should not be put on as an author of a paper. So again, another story, and this is a story that goes back a few years again. A resident of ours who had passed out went back to his original institution and wrote up a case report. The case was when he was a resident, and that's obviously now a year and a half ago when he sends us this paper. And he marks it to all the faculty and says, I've written up this paper and could you please have a look? So my first reaction when I read the paper is, I had nothing to do with this case probably. So I write back to him and say, and of course I'm very busy, so I don't have the time to read through this paper. So I tell him, no, sorry, please don't put my name on this paper. Also, I feel at this age, I don't need to be involved in a case report. So I say I don't want to. And the mail goes to everybody. And very quickly, everybody in the faculty, senior as well as junior to me, says, I don't want to be involved with the case report. So my head of department calls me and says, Piyush, ye bata, how is this going to work? Some faculty will have to be on this paper. So I said, yes. So he said, who will then be on the paper? All of us have said no. And he's made an effort. He's put up that case report. It is an interesting report. If he gets it published, what's wrong with it? So I said, no, nothing wrong. It's an interesting case. It's worth publishing. So sure. So I said, okay, let's look at who was involved with this case. Simplest way of doing it is to look at who operated on him. So he said, okay. So we pulled out the operation register because it was a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. By that time, nobody remembered. Pulled out the operation register, and it was my name. So I was scrubbed on the case. So he said, "Ab to tera naam jayega." I said, okay. So what is important is to be in your own minds, be clear as to who should be an author and should not be an author. Number one, a person who's done some work related to an original piece of research, he should be an author. Person who's got some involvement. So you mentioned a key thing somebody suggested to you, and it changed the way you wrote up the paper. That person I would definitely acknowledge. And if everybody else who was an author on the paper also agreed that that person's contribution was a fairly large amount by giving a totally different perspective to the data, or a suggestion which changed the way we started doing things, I would maybe even make the person an author. But what is important is, I as an individual don't take that decision. That decision is taken collectively by the 3 or 4 or 5 people who are actually involved with that work. So that's why what is the best time to decide who should be the authors of a paper? Actually, when you start doing the research, that's the best time to do it. But even if you don't do it at that time, once you've got the data and you've decided that, okay, now we're going to start analyzing the data, it's a good idea to sit down and say, okay, who's going to be an author on this paper? And that's useful. What is important is to have a conversation. We don't have a conversation. If we have a conversation, what we do is we work in our silos. I decide who will be the 6 authors on this paper. I genuinely forget a 7th and an 8th, or I deliberately forget a 7th and an 8th. I have still forgotten the 7th and the 8th. If I had had a conversation, that wouldn't have happened. So getting people in or moving people out will happen more easily if we talk. And we don't talk in adversarial tones. So our general thing is, ये मेरा है और मैं decide करूँगा कौन इस पे author बनेगा. No, that's not right. ये हम 5 लोगों ने काम किया या 4 लोगों ने काम किया. So the 4 or 5 of us should sit down and decide who should be the authors, and also decide what should be the sequence of authorship. Second, departments can make policies on authorship. Institutions can make policies on authorships. So as a department, you could say, there are 6 faculty members or 8 faculty members. Everybody can't go on to every clinical paper. So let's take 3 faculty who would get onto every paper, say in endocrinology, onto every paper that goes out, which has diabetes at the core of it. The other 3 faculty go out on or are involved in a paper which has something else equally common. What can I think of which is equally common? Nothing has equally thyroid. So yeah, good, thanks. So thyroid diseases, anything good. And the other 2 faculty go out on all the other diseases that go out, because put together that could be a policy decision. So now there is no fight amongst the 8 faculty as to who's going to get onto a paper. Or a department could say we do it by turns. So there are 3 senior people, there are 3 middle level people, there are 2 junior people. So we'll take 1 senior, 1 middle and 1 junior person on each paper, and we do it by rotation. So we have 3 of us, and we have 2 or 3 residents, and we've got 1 or 2 people from other associated departments, and we've got 7 or 8 people onto a paper, which on our original research paper would be a decent number of people. We once had a case report submitted to us with 24 authors on it. 6 of the authors were directors of that institution. We asked the authors to justify putting the directors of the institution there, and 6 of them. We could understand 1. So they said this patient was admitted with us for 4.5 months. And during that period, we actually had 6 directors. And therefore, all 6 names were there. Now, come along, you can't. And we said, well, why do you need to put all 6 directors? No, we have to seek permission of the director for any publication. And just because I am giving you permission as the director, I'm not the director, thank God, of any place. But if I, as the director, I'm signing off on something I have no clue of. Obviously, I can't, there's no way I can be involved in each and every paper that comes out of my institution. Why should my name go onto it? As the director, I need to ensure that my name does not go onto each paper. I'm just signing off to know that this publication is happening. That's all. If an administrative process has to be followed, that's it. But that administrative process does not entitle a person to become an author on a paper. So I'm very clear. I used to call when I wasn't a head of department, at all my sessions on authorship, I used to say, the heads of departments in India are the Gabbar Singhs of medicine. You know, they by their authority, the way they talk, the way they stand, that's how they, impose upon people whatever they want. Even today, even after I've been a head of department for a number of years, I still stand by it. There are heads of departments who make people's life miserable if they don't put their names onto a paper. And that's unfair. That is totally wrong. Because it's just not possible for a head of department of an active department to be involved in every publication that comes out of the department. Just not possible to be aware of every nitty-gritty. And if you're not aware of the nitty-gritty, you're not entitled to be an author. Sorry, a longish answer, but I get very passionate about this. I think heads of departments in India need to step back. They need to play a role model role. They need to provide guidance to people. But guidance doesn't mean I become an author of a paper. Yes, as head of department, I may permit you to do certain things, but that doesn't entitle me to authorship. Acknowledge me if you wish to. The problem is, if something fraudulent comes out of that paper, or somebody accuses you of doing something wrong, the first person to back out of it is the head department. I didn't do anything. These 5 guys got together and created all this rubbish. Then why do they run away? Sorry. And thank you for the opportunity to say all that I wish to say.
Thank you for the longish answers. I think this is a topic which is very not discussed. We don't have a safe space to discuss it or even address it or think it in our heads loudly even. So there's another question which is coming from the audience about permission to use sections of published data already. So reproduce with permission. Does that mean I have to personally ask the author to use the table in my review every time? Or is it enough if I provide citation for that table or the source?
Okay, so what you've got to look at is the paper that's published and see who holds the copyright. So if you see a sign which has a C and a full circle around it, that's a copyright sign. And that means that the person who holds the copyright is whom you have to seek permission from. In most print old-time journals, it's the journal publisher who holds copyright. So you would need to take permission from the journal, not from the author. A lot of journals would ask the authors, inform them that somebody else is asking for permission. Do you have any objection? And if they have no objection, they would go ahead and give the permission. Most other journals would just clear it through their copyright systems and allow a person to reproduce the information if it is not being used for commercial purposes. If they feel you're reproducing that information in a textbook where there is a profit motive involved, they might ask you for a certain charge. So you need to pay up $50, $100, $250, $500. Everybody has a different way of looking at it. On the other hand, if you look at the paper and you don't see a C and a circle, but you see a CC, a double C, and you have variations of a white and a black or a combination of white and black. Paper is published under a Creative Commons license. Now, Creative Commons license is a license which allows a journal to publish something that I have done without handing over copyright to the journal. That means I continue to be the owner of what I have written. And therefore, you would need to seek permission from the author. Every time you use this table, every time you use a figure, every time you wish to use something that somebody else has written up, you need to seek permission. I could on occasion say that I am going to write up something which is going to be converted into 4 different languages. And I could seek permission for translation into 4 different languages and publishing 4 different editions in 4 different languages in one go. But if I publish something today and I use the table and then wish to reuse the table 6 months down the line, a year down the line, I need to seek permission all over again. So the permission has to be granted by the copyright holder. If it's a Creative Commons license, then most licenses, and you can look up the exact which license is being used on the net. You can Google Creative Commons and you get variations of the type of license that's been used. So under certain licenses, you're free to reuse without informing the author. If that is the case, you just go ahead and say reproduced from such and such, which is published under the Creative Commons license number so and so. I think it's 4.0 if I'm not mistaken. But there are other Creative Commons licenses where you just need to inform the author. You don't need to wait for permission. The author gives you permission to reproduce, but you need to inform the author that you're using it. So depending upon the kind of Creative Commons license, and a number of journals today are being published under the Creative Commons license, wherever that CC mark is seen, you can go ahead and use the information because this is out in the public domain, available for anybody to use. Just look at what license it's been published under, copyright law or Creative Commons license. Under copyright law, always seek permission for repetitive use, even if it is 5 days later.
Thank you, Professor Piyush. Mr. Yogesh, there is another question which says that if I'm using multiple systems to use, there is one computer at home and one computer at work, will I still be able to sync up to my Zotero? I think the answer was given that if you have the email login for Zotero from your phone or your desktop or your laptop, you should be able to use it. Am I right, sir? Or would you want to come in? So you're muted.
ठीक। आप देख पाएंगे आपके सारे Zotero क्लाउड के थ्रू आपके सभी सिस्टम पे सिंक हो जाएंगे, no problem. There's another, the initial question was, one of the question was that duplicate items. So I can share my screen to show you that. So now this is a window where I have in my library, some of the items are duplicated. You can see here. So if I just click duplicate item, it will show me the list like this. The moment I'll click, it will ask me to merge the items and I just need to click merge. And if once my library is clean now, and I can use it now for my Zotero applications.
I have a question for Mr. Jogesh.
Yes.
Sir, how can we change the format of bibliography? Suppose we want to change from Vancouver style to different style depending on the journal requirement. How can we change this bibliography in a Zotero?
Okay. Once you are in Word, let me show you through Word. This is the Zotero. Let me share also first.
Yeah.
The screen. Suppose this is the scenario and you have an article. I'm just writing some of the things here. And I have, say, starting by adding my citation. To add citation, initially it comes with this particular window, which is a document preference window. And now you have the styles available here, a few which are by defaults available. So I'm choosing right now Vancouver just to explain it easily. And I can now select the items from the list. Say I can select in any order. So this is one. I can add another one. I think 3 is enough to add and explain. Now this is in Vancouver style. Now if I want to change this from Vancouver to any other style of my choice, I just need to go to the document preference and select, say, Chicago author date style and say OK. So it is now author date style and in alphabetical order. If I further want to change, I can just go and select any of the style from this particular list. And if this my style is not available here, I can go to manage styles. And in manage styles, I can have a long list of internet connection is required at this stage, and you can just go and check all the styles available for this purpose. So add citation is one option. You can go through this route also as well. Reference styles, get additional styles. So now it is connected to the web. Almost 9,892 styles are available. You need to search as per your requirement. And you just say, if you want to select any one of them, you just need to say click on that particular option. Say anything related with the, say, diabetes, or say academic medicine. This is the style. Academic medicine is just now added. Say OK. And now this is available in this toolbar as well. So just go to Word once again. Go to a document preference. Academic medicine is now added. Just click and say OK. So now this is now in superscript in 1, 2, 3 order, and you can change any of the styles. The styles can be changed with a click of few buttons only.
Thank you, Mr. Yogesh.
Thank you, sir. Yes.
I just had a simple question. I mean, I know we've done this. You've exhaustively talked about Zotero. So are there many other similar open source bibliography management systems available? And do they work on a similar premise, or is this perhaps the easiest one to go around? I mean, I just wanted to understand, because somebody may be already using another system. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of what is available, especially as an open source? And this is for Mr. Yogesh to, let's say some of the residents have already started using something else. So would you have any suggestions?
I don't think people are using any other software because this one is one of the best software available in open source.
Okay.
No comparison. Even
Okay.
Medley is available as free software, but it is a proprietary software. And interface slightly difficult, but not as good as this one. This is one of the best software available, free of cost. You can use it in multiple systems. You now recently there is a application available on for Android also, but not very successful. But people are praising it like anything. Only 10,000 downloads so far for this particular application. And as far as price is concerned, as far as facility for cloud is concerned, everything is good enough in Zotero for our kind of work. Of course, if you want much more detailed work, people prefer to go for EndNote and other software. Reference Manager, many other softwares are available, but all paid software, the good ones. But if you talk about free, open source, Zotero is one of the best and no comparison. User interface is very, very simple and easy.
Okay, so I mean, just reflecting on something what Dr. Piyush Sahni mentioned about plagiarism software, right? And said that some of the paid softwares have advantages because they can, go behind firewalls and actually look at stuff which some of the open source plagiarism softwares cannot do. Just correct me if I'm quoting you wrongly, Piyush. So the issue is there a similar issue? Because I know I have collaborators in the US who use EndNote consistently, right? Now, maybe because they have an institutional license for using it or something like that. So
Right.
Is there something which brings, I'm just still probing that original question. Is there some advantage for them if they also have access to Zotero as an open source? Why would they want to use EndNote? What advantage does something like that bring to them?
Some time back, the people were saying that if your database is too big, if your library is too big, then probably Zotero may get crash. But I have not seen in my system crash anytime.
Okay.
Yes, there is a possibility of crash in some system, but for me, I have not seen till date. I have conducted more than 30, 40 workshop on this particular topic, but I have not seen any crash on this Zotero.
Okay,
But yes, sometimes people see come up with very difficult problems like duplicate citations. They have duplicate citation in their system. They quote in the same paper from two different places for the same citation. And now they face problem because one citation they want to delete, other is still there. So duplicate citation need to be removed right from the beginning. Sometimes people make some mistakes while actually editing the citations. They edit the citation using a different wrong tool and they find sometimes difficulties. So application related issues are there, which are actually equally good in EndNote as well. So there is no issue. But as far as application is concerned, I think one of the best user-friendly and free of cost software, one of the rare one, which is available like this.
Thank you. Chitra, I think there's some more questions in the chat box.
Yes, sir. Dr. Sahu, do you want to go in?
There are a few questions for Professor Piyush. Yasdeep is asking 2-3 questions. The first question is, what is the acceptable level of plagiarism for chapter, for review article and original article? I think this has been already told by Sir.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, I think percentages are not important. I think it is important what is being looked at as plagiarism. So you see, the software understands that it has to look at stuff which is available already in another publication and compare it with yours. And if there is duplication, it points it out to you. Now that duplication could be from 100 articles and each article is less than 1%. The overall number may work out to 35%. But if it is less than 1% and you start looking at each one of them, it's a phrase or two, and it's a commonly used phrase, for example. For example, if I were to work on endemic goiter, if I was to use the phrase endemic goiter again and again and again, it would come up in 150 other places, and you would see similarities coming up. So I think extremely important to understand and look at what is being identified as a similarity. Generally, in an original article, if I have a similarity index below 10%, I'm happy. I may not spend too much time over this particular paper and trying to look at other things. But that doesn't mean that 10% means I'm happy and therefore I shouldn't look at it at all. I may not spend too much time, but I'd still grossly look at some of the things. Also, when you do a plagiarism check, generally remove the references, because the references would come up, would have been cited in a number of other papers. So generally remove the references, and most softwares allow you to do that, that you look at only the text of your paper. Chapters a little more acceptable, original articles a little less, reviews are in between somewhere. So that would be the general yardstick that I would use. However, so another story, somebody called me up, a very senior professor in another institution, and said, I want to come and meet you. This is a few years ago. And I said, sure. Is 5 days later okay? I'm going out for 4 days, and when I come back, we'll meet. No. It's too much, too far. Can I come today? So I said, okay, come. I presumed it was a medical issue. I presumed there was something of concern that he didn't want to talk on the phone. And he came to my office, and he looked disturbed. So what happened? So he says, I wrote a chapter for a book. The publisher has sent a report back to the editor, and the editor is a very good friend of mine, has sent it to me and said, you've plagiarized a lot of already published information. And, actually I have read everything. I have sat up and written this chapter on my own. I haven't looked at anything. This is a field that I am very closely interested in. I watch it very closely. I read about it very closely. And that's the reason, my friend, and he says to me on the phone, I didn't expect you to do this. And he's obviously disturbed. So I said, okay, let's see what is, so some 40%, 45% plagiarism. So we said, let's look at what it is. So what he'd done was, he'd been asked to write upon the changing scenario as far as sepsis was concerned. He was a critical care specialist. And he'd used a lot of the surviving sepsis guidelines, which had evolved from one time to another time. He looked at all this and put it all comprehensively together. He'd taken bits and pieces of the original guidelines. For each one of these, he had permission. For some, he had actually paid money to get permission, because it was chapter in a book. And when he told them chapter in a book, he'd got permission. He paid money to get permission. He was literally in tears. So at the end of a half an hour, 45-minute conversation, we realized that it was the stupidity of the publisher's editor who did not look at this carefully. I can understand the physician editor who was being handed a report, who did not understand much about plagiarism, or in those days about the use of Authenticate, to respond to this, and he just passed this on to his friend and said, I didn't expect it of you. He hurt him so badly that this man, he was sort of broken. I've rarely come across somebody so senior, so disturbed about something. And what we realized was that what he'd done was taken permission. reproduced material, and that reproduced material was being reflected as plagiarized. And for each one of these, in the covering letter he'd written, he enclosed copies of this. So there was stupidity on the part of the publisher, the editor of the publisher, to accuse him of plagiarism. So just to give you an example, how bad it can be, or how hurtful it can be to accuse somebody of plagiarism, especially if somebody's worked hard on something. Something else that I wish to talk about is self-plagiarism. I can write something today. So I work in a field, say portal hypertension, for example, something that I work on, non-cirrhotic portal hypertension. And if I were to look at chapters that I've written on non-cirrhotic portal hypertension in the past 15 years, and I've probably written about 6 or 7 of these, if you look at my chapters and you put them through a publication comparison software, you would find a lot of similarity. If I am writing on non-cirrhotic portal hypertension, my writing is going to be very similar. So if I am accused of self-plagiarizing, it will be because I can't think and write in any other language or in any other manner about that particular subject. So if I'm asked to write about non-cirrhotic portal hypertension again, now I either refuse, or if I write it, I say I will do it in a different format. So I do it as a case discussion. I do it as case snippets. So every time I use a different methodology to convey the same message. So if you are asked to write the same thing again and again, there'll still be similarity, because it's been with me for 30 years. How can I change it? So methodology sections of an original article, plagiarism to a certain extent acceptable. Result section, no, shouldn't happen at all. Discussion section, a little bit. Introduction, please, very, very little, if at all. Abstract, nothing. Should be all yours because it relates to your paper. Maybe a sentence or a phrase or two. So it all varies. It varies within articles, it varies from article to article. But I still say that look at what is being chosen and picked up by the software as similar and see whether it is truly similar or not. Make that judgment. Hope this helps.
Thank you, sir. So I have one question from Dr. Alpesh. So if you are a reader and you're reading article published in a reputed journal and you notice that there's something odd about the data. For example, we had one major paper which was published about a new diabetes medication. The course of the trial was for about 5 years, but about midway, they realized some data about, let us say, amputations related to the drug. So there was a small tweak in the inclusion criteria. So they decided to exclude individuals who were at high risk for amputations. But this information is mentioned as a small afterthought in extremely small font in the supplementary material. But at the end, the abstract looks beautiful. There is no increased risk of amputation with this drug. So if you are reading it with complete presence, you're likely to pick it up. But if you're just going to skim through the paper, you're very likely to miss it, and the drug is going to be exempt from this. So if you've picked this up, how do you maybe, of course, when they've mentioned it, I think they're exempt from not providing full data. But if you hadn't found that, how do you go about it? Do you write to the authors? Do you write a letter to the editor? How do you go about it, sir?
So the best thing to do if the paper is published, you write to the editor, and you write to the editor and say that this is what you found. Provide scientific reasons for why you think that this is inappropriate and this should have been highlighted more. Request for your information to be passed on to the authors and for the journal to carry a clarification or your letter to be published. If you feel very strongly about it, you could actually ask some colleagues to also write about the same thing to the editor, so that the editor gets to know that it's not just one person who is mentioning it, there are other people also who picked it up. Most editors would respond to this by sending this to the authors and ask the authors to respond to it. After a period of a decent enough period, maybe a week or 2 weeks for them to respond, after they get their reply, they would write to you and say that they'd probably respond to you immediately and say, we're sending it to the authors for a clarification. As soon as they get a reply from the authors, they write to you and say, we have a reply from the authors and we'll publish it in the journal. As soon as we're ready to publish it, we'll share it with you. If you don't get a response, what do? It's very unlikely that if the paper is published in a good journal, in a reputed journal, the editor will not respond. The editor will respond. If you don't get an immediate response, wait for a few days. And if you don't get a response, write to the editor all over again. If there is an alternative email ID available, write to the editor on the alternative email ID. If there is a second editor whose email ID is available, write to the second editor. It sometimes happens these emails go into our junk mailboxes because you're not on our contact lists. And therefore, if somebody is not meticulously looking at their junk mailboxes, most editorial offices do look at junk mailboxes on a very regular basis, because we know emails go into junk mailboxes because people are not on our emails. And if you still don't get a response, then you would be well within your rights to create a discussion forum of some kind or raise this issue in a discussion forum of your professional society or somewhere else and say that this needs to be highlighted if it's an important enough issue. So I don't think if you find something which is amiss that you should let it be. As physicians, we must, as responsible clinicians, we must point this out to the public at large, and the public at large essentially is our own community. So I would then highlight this and take it to a professional society. It's possible it's an opinion. What you were mentioning was something very specific, and to my mind, that kind of a thing should have been mentioned as a serious event. And the fact that the protocol was changed was again something that would have been documented. If it was a trial, it would have been registered, and the protocol alteration would have been mentioned in the trial registration document also. So that's something else where you can go and verify what has happened. And if despite that you do not get a decent enough response, then raising the bar and taking it to a professional society would be fine. There would be instances where somebody might just have a grudge against somebody and therefore create this kind of a thing. And then it's up to the professional society to decide whether they wish to take this further or whether this is a grudge that is coming up. If it is a grudge that's coming up, then obviously you just need to back off and say, we're not going to get involved with this. On the other hand, if it's something which is very genuine, then you need to, as a professional society, as a professional body, take it up with the editors of the journal. Sometimes if an editor does not respond at all, or the journal doesn't respond at all, it may make sense to go to a sister journal, to an affiliated journal, or to a similar journal in the same subject and write to them and say, look, this is an issue that we raised related to this paper. This paper was not published in your journal. However, the editors are refusing to bring this to the notice of the public. And we feel this is an important issue, and we wondered if you would publish this letter of ours, a viewpoint that we have, where we've critiqued this whole paper, and so you must have sound scientific reasons, arguments to go ahead and do that. And some journals would take this up and publish it. I know for a fact that the Lancet has often been involved in these kind of things, the BMJ and the Lancet. I also know that there are other journals. We ourselves would, if something like this would come up to us, we would be happy to take this up and publish it. Because if we were sure that this was genuine and this was important. So there are a number of other journals which would do it, but most good editors, good journals would let your concerns be published in the pages of the journal.
Thank you, sir, for your comments. There is a question from Steve. What if I have checked with one software like I Authenticate and it is 9%, and the editors use some other software and found it like it's 22%. So how to go about?
The publishing process is a process of negotiation. It's a process of negotiation between the editor, the author, and the peer reviewers. So we negotiate when we respond to reviewers' comments. We say, you said these 7 things. We agree with 3 of them. We don't agree with 4 of them. The 3 of them, we made the requisite changes. We provided you new information. For the other 4, we don't think we should add all this up. The judge in this argument, in this negotiation, the arbitrator is the editor of the journal. Now, here, when the editor takes a stand that it's 22% and yours was 9%, they'll send you a report and say, this is 22% and this is where we feel that you're messing up. If you feel that genuinely you have messed up and your previous report was not genuine, not correct, because they've used a better software, they had more access to databases, maybe they had access to their own journal, which your software did not have access to, because all softwares don't have access to everything. You can look at that, and if you feel that they're being unreasonable, you can write to them and say why you think they're being unreasonable. So I have published papers with 20% plus plagiarism because it was fine. There was no reason. It was not an original article. It was a review. The person had written 20 other papers along the same lines. There was so much original research that the person has done. And all the plagiarism, or 80% of the plagiarism, was coming from his own papers. So that's acceptable. So I think what is important is not the percentage. It's important to look at what is the similarity. Where is the similarity? And if you can justify that similarity, that's fine. So I won't quibble with somebody over the percentage, because if the percentage is coming from, so for example, this 22% could be because the editor by mistake included the bibliography. Suddenly your percentage goes up because the bibliography gets included. So if you were to remove the bibliography, you get 9%. You add the bibliography, it goes up to 22%. So that could happen. So the editor may have made a mistake. And if you find the commonality or the similarity in the references, that's a very easy way to explain it. So I would look at what is the similarity is and then try and resolve the issue. So if the editor is finding something different from what you found, you've either got to justify what you found scientifically or accept what the editor is saying and make the change. Third option is go away from the journal, say this is trashy journal, and go to another journal. Don't waste your time. Okay.
Thank you. Sir, another question related to copyright. When students are writing a review of literature for their thesis, do they need to take copyright permission or it is not required?
So if you are copying information, then you need to take permission. If you are using verbatim information, if you're using tables, if you're using figures. So I'm currently struggling with a review article that somebody wrote. When they wrote this article, they probably wrote it about 2.5 or 3 years ago. They took permission from somebody to reproduce a figure. They then sent it to one journal, second journal, third journal, and finally came to us, and we probably accepted. I don't know how many journals they went to. We've accepted the paper and we are about to publish it. And we asked them that your covering letter mentioned that you had taken permission for reproducing this figure. Could you provide us the details so that we may add this in the legend to the figure? And they now say we can't find the permission letter. So we said we just got to hold the paper till such time as you either find the letter or get the permission all over again. I can't publish it. Okay. So review article, review of literature in a thesis, in a protocol, doesn't matter. Even a journal club, even a seminar where I do a presentation where I copy material verbatim, ideally I should be seeking permission. Okay. Today, a lot of stuff is being done online. A lot of things are being recorded. And a lot of things are then available on YouTube. If you've plagiarized something, if you've copied something without permission, you put it up without permission, then that's a problem. I have a huge problem with conferences where people keep taking pictures of slides of the presenter and pictures of original data slides. When I go to a prestigious conference, I present original data to impress my peers as to what I'm doing. I may not have published that information yet. You can't take a photograph and then use that information. I've actually sat in an audience where somebody used my slides and tried to present what I had presented. And I had to politely get up at the end of the talk and say, you know, on this slide, maybe you wanted to say this and not this. If you look at my slides, they're usually, you know, a few words and nothing more. There are no written sentences. So, you know, you could say the wrong thing. So when you copy, you've got to copy with a little sense, with a little intelligence. And if you don't do that, then that's a problem. But I think what is still important is to look at what is similar, and then decide whether you can whether you've made a mistake or it's something that you can justify.
Thank you so much, sir.
Professor Tandon, do we have time to take another question, or should we begin the wind up, sir?
Yeah, I think we should start winding up, because it was we've taken 2 hours of our faculty, and that's what we'd promised them. We should not breach our promise, like we've talked of breach of many promises in the last couple of hours. So maybe if there's any last comments which have got missed out, or questions which they had thought would come and have not come, maybe Mr. Yogesh to start with, and then Dr. Sani. Otherwise, we will then, call it a day or call it an evening. Mr. Yogesh, you're muted. If there are any specific last words you want to leave the audience with?
So many questions, because my workshop is normally a hands-on workshop. So after giving such kind of demo, I receive at least 30, 40 questions, and in between so many queries, but difficult to suggest at this stage that what they should need to know must. So in my demonstration, I just touched upon few things. And in fact, in each topic which I discussed during my presentation, recorded one, is only just the first ABC of each topic. Say, for example, bullets and numbers, but how to manage in detail, I could not cover. Same thing with cross-reference. I could not cover many other details which were actually available in MS Word. Similarly, in Zotero, I was able to cover the basic features, but not in details again. So there are so many questions. I can just keep on talking for 2-3 hours on this particular topics. So maybe when people will ask the question, my email address may be with them, and they can ask me question anytime in future. And hope whatever I have explained may be a trigger for them to understand basic concept. For example, I can just talk about one red line which I created under the vision in the very first demo. Why I did that particular exercise, just to tell them, to everyone, that please explore the complete toolbar available in MS Word. This particular icon is available, and you can just touch it and you will get many more details about underline only. And why we need colored underline? We have black and white underline already. So just to explain some of the things and just to highlight few things, you need this particular line or a different color line if you want to explain few things. Purpose is not just this is a simple tool. Purpose is that you need to explore all the tools available in the toolbar. I could not open one tool which is available in very first words section, that how to retrieve the old commands or old icons which were available in the previous version. It is available in all commands going through one process. So I was thinking that people will come for this platform and ask questions, and then I will explain each and every point. So maybe lack of participation at this stage. Sometimes in future I will be able to do.
Thank you.
Explain all this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Piyush Sani. Last words before we wind up.
So I think it's important to be aware of the issues related to publication ethics. It's important to not get caught on the wrong foot. If you get caught doing something which is inappropriate, it could mean the end of a career. And therefore, what is extremely important is that one is aware of these and remains away from them. If you have a doubt as to whether you should or you should not do it, generally err towards the side of not doing it. But if you have a good mentor, a guide who can help you, go ahead and ask them, and they should be able to guide you. If you still have a problem, there are multiple fora available where you could pose such questions to people and they would be happy to answer. One of them is called the Committee on Publication Ethics, COPE. You can write to them with a problem and they would respond. The other people you can write to is the World Association of Medical Editors, pronounced WAME, written as WAME. You could write to their ethics committee, which responds in an anonymous manner to questions that are raised on ethical issues that you may encounter. So these are two bodies which are respected internationally, and you could seek their inputs if you have a problem. But I think awareness is more important. And once you're aware, then if you have a doubt, or on the side of not doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good message. I think everybody should. So look before you leap, even while publishing.
True.
I think the moderators can take over and bring the session to a close.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Piyush Sani, for that wonderful session. Thank you, Mr. Yogesh Kumar, for your involved and extensive coverage of all the doubts and the module. Thank you, Professor J.P. Sahu, for being a good co-moderator with us with a lot of exciting questions. Sincere gratitude to Professor Nikhil Tandon here and Dr. Alpesh Goyal and Dr. Yashdeep Gupta and Mr. Mintu for providing the support. Dr. Sanjay Kalra did join us briefly, so thank you. It's an extremely relevant endeavor, necessary to increase the knowledge and awareness amongst our research graduates. And thank you all for sparing your Saturday evening to join us for this session. So with that, with the permission of Professor Tandon, we'd like to end the session.